like that welcoming music to just make you feel real hyped.
Gets me so excited.
I was doing
It
like a
is.
head bob.
I know. I felt like I had to resist the urge to do like a full-on dance and everything with this. Welcome everyone. We have a fantastic time today. It looks like all of the chat is going. Getting a quick little make sure that sound's doing good. All right, sound is good on the live stream. Everything looks pretty good. Welcome everyone. Let's see. We got our very own Connor Simmons in the chat right now saying, let's get some maps and apps. I think that is a great thing we should do. We have Dimitri 933444. Let's go. Everyone, this feels like we got a lot of people already hanging out. Someone with the "you got this" not coming through, but it definitely the feeling's getting through. The emoji just isn't. As everyone knows, my name is Mike Hartington. I'm on the Ionic team. I'm joined today by two fantastic guests who will be doing most of the talking, so you won't have to hear from me. We have Dallas James. Dallas, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Hey everyone, my name is Dallas James. I'm the product manager for the Capacitor web native team, so focusing on ensuring developers are successful building web native applications using Capacitor.
Awesome. We're glad to have you here, Dallas. And then also from my team, we have Thomas Vitas joining us. Thomas, want to give everyone a little introduction?
Yeah, howdy everyone. I'm Thomas. I was previously on the Capacitor team as a software engineer. Switched over to the DevRel team a couple months ago, so you'll be seeing my ugly mug in more videos, live streams, and stuff like that. But yeah, excited to talk Google Maps today. So I think, Mike, if you're ready, we can hand it off to me.
All right, cool. So let's get Thomas's slides up here. I'm going to hand it over to you all, and I'll be back towards the end. Break a leg, y'all.
Thanks, Mike. Again, like I said, everyone here is probably aware. I'm Thomas, and the other guy on the stream with me is Dallas. And we're going to talk Capacitor Google Maps. This is the newest plugin we've released for Capacitor. It's the first new one we've released since Capacitor 3 came out. So we're really excited to jump into it and talk about how you can add a map to your app. So yeah, like I mentioned, Google Maps, the most requested plugin I've gotten in Twitter DMs, Discord messages on the forums. How do I add a map? How do I do this? There were various solutions. There's a community plugin, the Capacitor community org. There's a Cordova plugin with a lot of hackiness you can get working. But we figured a lot of enterprise users wanted it. A lot of individual devs wanted it. Why not make our own spin on the Capacitor app? So let's talk about how we get this working. We're using the underlying iOS, Android, and JavaScript SDKs. We are using the native SDKs. And why are we doing that? We're doing that because it's more performant than using the JavaScript SDK. And it gives us a couple more features than you might expect. And I'm sure Dallas can talk over that when we get to the demo. But we're using the native iOS SDK on when you use Xcode and iOS. We're using the native Android SDK when you're using Android Studio and deploying to an Android phone or an emulator. And we're falling back to the JavaScript SDK if you have a PWA or you're using it on a website. So we really binds together the native experience with the web technology, which is really what Capacitor is all about, just kind of unifying those two things and putting them together. So let's talk about how does it work? How do we get the native experience feeling webby, and how do we make it feel like it fits it's a part of Capacitor? How do we make that feel? So the big thing we do is web components. We have Stencil, which is a web component generator for making design systems. Web components are really cool. We love them here at Ionic. So in order to expose the native map to the web layer, we use a web component to wrap around all of the native goodness inside of the web layer. And that lets us do things like apply certain CSS rules like positioning, width, height, where letting it fit in line with your web content. So you really get the best of both worlds, where you have that native, like, again, I would really want to emphasize, you have the native map view. It's not in the web, it's in the native layer, and we expose it through a web component, which is really cool. We've got a great dev diary by the dev that wrote most of the code for this plugin that you guys should check out after this stream. But we use a web component to wrap the native component. It's super easy to drop into anything. Here's our React example that we have in our docs. We have an Angular and Vue example as well. But as you can see here, it's super easy. We look up that custom web component by the ID, and we hit Google Map.create, link it to this ref, put in the API key, add some configs like, hey, where do we want to zoom? How deep do you want to zoom in, and where do you want to zoom in, like lat and long? And it's super easy to drop in. It's in these 4 lines of code: importing API key, getting the ref, and creating the map. You have a map in your app, which is super, super awesome. Oops, I forgot to update this slide, but it's installable off NPM. It's under @capacitor/Google Maps. I should fix that, but it's in our docs. We'll show you a link to the docs at the end of this live stream. It's installable today. You can just install it. It's been out there. People are using it. It's super great. I'm super excited about it. It's probably one of my favorite plugins that we've made, just because the technical stuff behind it is really cool, and it lets you put a map in your app. So now I'm going to pass it off to Dallas to go over our demo, so we can show, hey, here's how you put the map in your app. Here's what it looks like to sign up for a Google Maps API key, and what the process looks like. 'Cause it's a little bit more involved than setting up other plugins, since you need to rely on Google Maps. So Dallas, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks for the preview there and kind of the high-level overview of Google Maps, Thomas. Appreciate it.
Yep.
So yeah, we're going to dive in and we're going to live code this today, which is going to be really exciting. And we'll show you just how easy it is to get this up and running inside of your app. So here I've got my code base open. I'm an Angular dev at heart, and so we're going to be using an Angular, but all of the tools and techniques we'll be using will apply just as well to React or Vue or just plain the regular JavaScript ecosystem as well. And then alongside here, I have my emulator up and running. Actually, this isn't an emulator. This is my physical device that's running and being mirrored to my screen. That is an important caveat. If you are using Google Maps on one of the new M1 MacBooks, the simulators don't work exactly. So you have to run on a real device. We've called that out in our docs as well. So we'll talk about that a little later as we get to it. But since it's up, we'll talk about it right now. Okay, so let's just dive in and talk about what it takes to get up and running with Google Maps. So I have over here in my web browser, I have our Google Cloud Platform. We'll talk about enabling these services and what it looks like. But we're going to start over here in the docs. So inside of the Capacitor docs, we have a new section specifically for this Google Maps plugin. And this is going to walk you through each of the steps that's required to get up and running with Google Maps. So if we look here at the top, we have our simple npm install command. This is npm install @capacitor Google Maps, like Thomas mentioned. And then we simply run the npx capsync command to install all of the native libraries that are necessary. One thing to note with this Capacitor Google Maps plugin is only Capacitor 3 compatible. So that is something to be aware of as well if you're looking to use this. When we moved from Capacitor 2 to Capacitor 3, there were some architectural changes that needed to happen for plugins to work with Capacitor 3, and because we've built this after that Capacitor 3 release, this is only working with Capacitor 3. Something else to be aware of. So once we have this installed onto our application, I've already done this for our demo app, so we won't walk through that. The next thing we need to do is generate API keys. So we've linked out here to the Cloud Console for Google. You will go here to enable your keys. So something to note with these keys is that Google requires you to have an account with billing enabled. Now, if you are only using the Android SDK and the iOS SDK, these maps are free. You do have to have billing enabled, but the maps that you will generate with this plugin are the free version. So that is an important caveat. And that's one reason why you might consider using this plugin as opposed to using the web SDK. right? It is possible currently to use the Web SDK, run it on your mobile device on Android and iOS, and it will run just fine. But the web maps that you get are not free maps, right? You have to pay for those. It's, you know, so many US dollars per 1,000 maps, as opposed to the native ones, which are completely free. And so that's one of the big draws and why there's been such demand in the community for a plugin like this to work within Capacitor. So let's jump over to the Cloud Console and we'll take a look at what it looks like in there, how we can go about enabling our account to work with this. So in my example, I have already enabled billing for my account. So we won't walk through that. Google has great documentation, but it's you know, 1 or 2 steps of adding in a credit card is to do that. To find these APIs, we come to the API library. And if you go to the navigation menu inside of this APIs and services here, we can see this library option. This is where we're at. So if we click on this, it'll just reload the same page. It'll come here. Right now, for me, these maps are directly at the top. That may be the same way for you. That may change in the future. If you do not see that, you can simply search for maps and it will bring up these SDKs. So what we want to do is ensure that we enable each of these for the platforms we choose to support. If you are only building for iOS, for example, you may only need to come in and enable the Maps SDK for iOS. In my case, I've already enabled this API. If you have not, you'll see an enable button here instead of manage. You simply click that button. This API, this SDK will be enabled for your account. So we can go through and do that for each of these, the Map SDK for iOS, the Map SDK for Android. Again, we'll see this is already enabled. And then there's also the Maps JavaScript API as well. This is the other one that we would come in and enable. So in this case, we have all 3 enabled. This demo app runs on all 3 platforms, though today we're primarily going to focus on demoing for iOS. That's what I have handy. Once we have those enabled, the next step we need to do is generate our API key. So I have this credential screen pulled up. You find this here, again, in APIs and services. And then we have another section here for credentials. So if we open up our credentials, this will take us to this page here. And I have an API key already generated that we will be working with. If you were to create your own, you simply come up to create credentials and generate an API key. This will create an API key. It will show the API key here. You will copy this and move this into your project. So again, for our case, we already have one, so I'll delete this one that I just generated. So you'll take that API key, and that's as simple as it is, right? Once we have that API key generated, we flip back over into our code. For Android, you have to add this SDK key, this API key, into your Android manifest file for Capacitor. So this file is exposed. If you're not super familiar with the Android project file structure, inside of your Android folder, inside of app, source, main, Android manifest.xml. That's where you'll find this file. So you'll come into this file and you will add this line. And we do have this line in our docs as well to show how that works. And I'll just flip back over there for Android. So it's this metadata line. And you have this specific Android name. So this is telling the Android operating system, right? This is the API key for our Android Geo. Right? That's how Google works. And then we specify our Android value with our API key. So again, in the example here, I have added this in. I've added it just inside of the application tag. And it has the geo key, and then my key is over here off screen. So that's the installing the API key for Android. For iOS, we don't need to do this. We can simply pass in the API key through our constructor that we'll see later. The other caveat to iOS is there are 2 optional permissions. If you intend to use the maps to show or reference the current user's location, perhaps you want to use the current user's location to center the map's position, you would need to provide these info plist options that describe to the user why you need this information. If you do not provide these and you attempt to access the user's location, the app will throw errors at you and it won't function. And again, we've linked here in the docs. If you need any help or assistance configuring the info plist, you can do that there. Alternatively, there's also in the VS Code extension, I believe you can do that from in here as well in terms of configuring values. So we have our API key. It's loaded in. We have our Android manifest all configured. And so now it is time to start building our application. So here I have our home page, and I'll bring this back up so we can kind of see this developing side by side. And we're going to talk about what it looks like to get this in. So right now we have this beautiful blank screen. There's nothing on it other than a title, and we're going to put this map in our app. We have our container, and we have our TypeScript file for those that are familiar with Angular. Again, if you're using a React or you're using Vue, the concepts will be similar, even though they're applied differently. And I definitely recommend looking at the examples that are present on the Capacitor docs page as well, that talk about how to do this for each specific framework. So let's go about doing this. Thomas mentioned that there is a web component that we use to build this into our application, and that is our Capacitor Google Map plugin. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to drop that in right here. So this Capacitor Google Map is a special web component, and we use a web component for several reasons. The biggest one is this allows the plugin to create a special structure inside of this web component that allows us to do some special manipulation on the native side, specifically on iOS. So if you've used any of like the previous versions of Google Maps, like the legacy Cordova one that exists in the community, to achieve Google Maps, right, because we're rendering native, like actual native views, you have to decide if you want to put it above the HTML or below the HTML. And there are challenges that come with both of those. If you put it above the HTML, then it overlays over the top of all of your elements, and it will hide things as you scroll up. It'll stay above toolbars. It'll be above, if you have like a bottom sheet component from framework, it'll be above the bottom sheet, and that's very visually breaking. We don't like that. However, if you put it below the HTML, that comes with another set of challenges in terms of how do we pass all the touch events through the HTML, and how do we make sure that our HTML is transparent all the way through. And again, this presents more issues on iOS than it does for Android, because iOS has very special touch delegation controls that you have to interact with in order to enable that pass-through. So what we found, and I would definitely recommend jumping over to our blog to read that dev blog that our developer put together who built this, is that there is a very special way that if you create specific elements inside of your web code, they become accessible as Vue containers on the native side. And this is all specific to iOS. So you can then inject your map element, right? This is a native element into the Vue container created by your HTML components. So instead of having the map either above your entire HTML or below your entire HTML, it's actually in line where it's supposed to be in your HTML, which means it respects the z-index hierarchy. So if it's supposed to go under a bottom sheet, it does. If it's supposed to be over a background color, it is, because it respects all of that hierarchy. This is a really, really cool breakthrough in how to embed native components into actual web content. And we're really excited for a lot of the potential that this brings. Now, this is not the case for Android. These APIs that are needed to do this for Android are not currently available in most Chromium deployments, the web view that actually runs on Android. However, we are working to try to see what other alternatives can we do. Perhaps maybe we can get these enabled on Android so that we could do something like this in the future for Android as well. But that's the purpose of this special Capacitor Google Map web component. It is setting up the entire structure that is necessary to make this really cool technique happen. And it also, on the flip side, right, looking back at Android, right, because we're rendering underneath the web view, one of the other big challenges that has been present is that you can't scroll the map with your page. So if you have a page with a lot of content and you try to scroll up on it, that map just kind of sticks there. And so you're kind of left to do full screen maps that don't scroll, right, on a page that doesn't scroll. Or design your content in such a way that you're not looking to scroll the map, or you're expecting to only scroll underneath the map. It really limits the design ability of what you're able to do. And this Capacitor Google Map web component provides the coordinates on like the bounding coordinates of this element to the native layer so that we can move that map for Android and scroll it with the content to make it appear as though it is actually scrolling, because it's scrolling with your elements. So this brings a lot of breakthroughs in terms of how to interact with native elements inside of your hybrid capacitor applications. And we're excited that we were able to get this to work for Google Maps, one of the most highly requested components out there. So we have our web component. So now let's go about getting it hooked up. With this in place, we're going to jump over into our TypeScript code, and we have a couple of imports that we want to do. So we're just going to go ahead and drop those in here. We're going to import Google Map from Capacitor Google Maps. I'm going to import my environment file here. This is where my API key lives, and so we currently do have that as well. And then there's the element ref and view child. These are special classes that Angular gives you to interact with the HTML in our file that we'll use later. So that's what we're importing there. And then we're going to create a couple of variables here in our class. So let's create a map variable. This is our Google Map. This is what's going to be the reference holder that we will place on there. This is going to hold the reference to our Google Map. So if we want to interact with it later, which we'll do in this demo, we can do that. Once we have this, we're going to grab a reference to our map. Let's see here. Let's create our function. And I'm just going to copy this in here so I don't mistype anything. So we're going to create this method here. We've done this as an asynchronous method. You can use async await like we've done here. You could also use .then promise chaining if that's something that you're more familiar with. But ultimately, what we're looking to do is we are going to create this map when some sort of event occurs, right? That can be a button click. That can be when the page finishes loading. We need a reference to the element, and then we're going to create a map inside of that web component. So we are awaiting our Google Map create function, as Thomas showed us earlier in the slides. We have given this the ID of my cool map, and we're passing in our API key from our environment file. This is what allows this to work on both web and iOS. And so we need to make sure that we're passing in that API key there. I believe Android might need that as well. And then we provide the reference to the element. So this is telling Google Maps, here is our web component. If you do not reference the Google Maps web component that is provided, the map will not behave like you expect. It won't scroll. It won't even show up on iOS. It needs to reference that special web component for this. Then we define where do we want the map to load at, what lat and long, where do we want to zoom out. And then there's this option of force create. I have it true here for this demo. All this does is if the map already exists, like there's this ID that already exists, it will automatically force recreate it if you call this method again. By default, this is false. So if you've already created a map with the ID, it'll just ignore that moving forward. Okay, so we have our map creation function. And so now we want to create the map. So for this first map part, let's create this on load. For the sake of simplicity, we're just going to use a timeout. When you're dealing with web component framework or with single page application frameworks, you have to deal with hydration and when components are ready. There are better ways to do that, but for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to use a timeout so that when this map becomes available, we will wait 500 milliseconds to ensure the element is fully rendered and there before we call create map. You might do this more with a lifecycle hook like Ion View did enter. You might do something like that. If you're using React, there's the use ref hook that you could tie into that will trigger once that element is actually rendered. You could do something like that. But again, for the sake of simplicity for this demo, this is what we're going to do. Once we have this up and running, let's go ahead and save these. And we're going to go ahead and do a build, and we're going to do our npx cap copy. As I mentioned, I've already installed the dependencies. I've already done the npx cap sync here, so we can just copy over our content. So as this builds, we will go ahead and rerun this here on our demo. We'll see that build succeed. We'll see it install. Here it launches. And here's our Google Maps. And there's our map being rendered on the screen, which is exciting. So we have a map, right? And it's as simple as that. And you'll see if we try to scroll this page, this map is scrolling on here. It's respecting the hierarchy, right? You can see as we scroll under, it's actually going under the header. It's utilizing the transparency of the header to actually blur the map. And then if we also interact with the map, we can do that. So this is interacting directly with the map and scrolling around. So we can slide around. We can do our pinch in and out to kind of zoom around. We can try to get a real close look here at the Ionic headquarters here in Madison. So it's as simple as that to get our map up and running, right? All we've done so far is drop in our Google map, and we have called this create function. We have a map, and everything else is already supported for us out of the box, which is really exciting. So now let's take it to the next level. Let's start to interact with our map a little bit more. Let's do something with markers. This is one of the primary functions that we support initially at launch. We do plan to add more features over time. And one of the benefits about this being part of Capacitor Core and part of the open source plugin is that if you are missing a feature and you really need something, anyone from the community can go create a PR to add this. And, us here at the Ionic team will look at that and make sure the PR matches the standards, and it'll get merged in and released in the next release, which is really exciting. So let's grab the marker here and let's look at what it takes to add this. So we're going to create another async function. Anytime we're working with native code, we're typically doing asynchronous interaction with our across that bridge. And so you'll see this example will very heavily leverage async await patterns. So let's create this function of add marker. Our add marker, we're not going to give it any parameters. We're just going to keep this really simple. And then we're also going to put a holder up here at the top to just track our marker so that we know what the ID of this is, so we can do something with that later if we need to. So we'll add our marker. This is just an ID that will come back. This is just a string, so we'll just type that as such. We'll come back to our marker here. And then to actually create this marker, we will do, if there's already a marker reference, then we will do nothing. We'll just return. We already have a marker reference, so there's no need to do anything more. Otherwise, we'll say, .marker, and we will await. And we're going to reference our map that we created, right? So you remember we set the result of creation here to a map reference, and that's defined up here. So we can hold that reference somewhere, right? If you're using React, potentially using a state hook, you will await this map, and then you would say add marker. So you can see there's a whole pile of options that are exposed on here. Most of these we're not going to cover today, just due to lack of time. A lot of these deal with different event listeners. If you need to know when the map moves, if you need to know when the map changes. And then there's also, do we want to disable scrolling? We support marker clustering. So let's just go ahead and add a single marker for this case. And the marker takes a marker object. So the most simple thing we can do is add a coordinate. And this takes a lot long. And rather than type this in manually, I'll just copy this over. So here is our lat long. This will define where this marker will render. If we look, there's also a handful of other options here. So we can make the marker draggable so the user can move it. If we have custom icons, that's supported in here as well. We can also add some additional information, like if we want to add a title to this marker, we can do that. Again, for the sake of simplicity, we'll just leave this as is. The other function that you might see in a lot of cases is you might want people to be able to click on markers and to be able to provide them with additional information based on the marker. Say you're marking all of the restaurants in the area. We can do that by looking at the map, and specifically in our event handlers here, we have on marker click listener. So we can provide a function to this to handle when a marker is clicked on. And you'll see this has a callback. And this is our event. And we'll just look at this quickly. This isn't actually typed very well in this case. But this will provide you with your marker so that you know which marker is clicked on, and then you can do something specific to that. For example, we might show a bottom sheet component, right? That's new in Ionic 6, and it works incredibly well with the Google Maps interactions and UI and those design paradigms, to where you might show some additional content, maybe a name, a phone number, maybe a website, if you're showing locations of restaurants. So we have our marker. Let's just jump over here and let's quickly add a button for this. So again, just for the sake of a demo here, I have this code already written. We have our Ion button. We've set our primary as our color type, making sure this is a type of button. And on click, we're calling that add marker function. It's as simple as that. So we'll go ahead and save that, and we'll rebuild this to let that work. While we are building that, let's talk a little bit about some other functions that we can add to this. So if we look specifically with our map, something else that we might want to do is programmatically adjust where the map is, right? We want to change the location in the world. So again, while this is building, we'll start on this, and we will build our async function, and this will be to move our map. Quickly, we got our maps is all built and loaded over here. So we have our maps, and when we click our add marker, there it is. It's a real device. I can't click on the screen. So there's our marker, right? It drops right on there, and we can see as we move the map around, the marker stays positioned, right? Again, the scrolling still works. So with that one extra function, we now have a marker positioned on our map. Okay. So let's go back to moving the map programmatically. How do we go about doing that? Well, let's come over here. So for the sake of the demo, let's have a map state, right? That way we can kind of toggle back and forth between two different locations for the user. So we'll create a map state. We'll define this as like a 0 or 1, essentially a Boolean on or off. Just type that. There we go. So our map state will either be state 0 or state 1, and we'll start at state 0. That way we can go back and forth here. And then down in our move map functions here, we can say if our this.map state is 0. So if we're in the first state, let's make the state, we'll change the state and say we're going to the other one. Else we must be in state 1. So we'll say this map state is 0. Okay. Oops. Okay. So the map element that we have actually gives us a method to do this. So we can look and we can say, okay, this map. And when we want to move the map, right, you think of this as a camera, right? There's a camera looking down at the world, and you're adjusting that camera position. So we have this set camera mechanism here. So set camera takes a configuration. If we look in here, there's a couple of different items. We can change the angle of here. We can change the bearings, the coordinates. Do we want to animate to that location? Yes or no? For what we'll be doing, we'll just give it a new coordinate set. Okay. And I'll copy that over. So this is a different coordinate. And then when we want to move it back, we'll just use that exact same code. So we'll drop in that same exact code here, and we'll say, when we are at the alternate location, then set the camera back to Madison. So lastly, all we just need to do here is add a button. We can simply copy this. Oops. Copy. Paste this in here, and this will be our move map button. Okay. We'll change our function, move map, and let's change the color as well. Secondary. And this will build for us. So then we'll be able to see that this will add a new button to our screen, and it will allow us to click that button to move the map back and forth. We gotta wait for our build to finish there before I kick it off over here in Xcode. Okay, so here it goes. All right, Google Maps. So we can add our marker back. We can see that still works. And then we can click this move map button, and we've now moved over to Boise. where I happen to live. So we can look at this and we can keep tapping that move map and we can see it's going back and forth. One important point, right? We rendered this marker on the map and that marker stays there, right? Which is also really, really important, right? Just because we move the camera doesn't mean we want that marker to go away. So that marker stays there. So let's move the marker too. Let's add a function to do that and talk about how to update these markers. So we're going to add another async function here. This is our move marker function. We're going to do very, very similar behavior here where we're going to just toggle it back and forth. So we'll add a marker state as well. We'll just use that same. Ooh, there we go. I'll use the same on-off type of functions. Okay, we'll go ahead and expand that. And let's talk about moving this marker. So first thing to check for, if our marker, right, we have our marker ref. If that doesn't exist yet, let's do nothing because we don't want to try to move a marker that doesn't exist. That won't work and we'll get lots of errors. The next thing we need to do is we're actually going to remove the marker. So this .map.remove marker. So if we wanted to remove the marker, right, this is how we go about doing that. So we'll go ahead and remove it and we pass it this .marker. And you can probably guess how we're going to achieve this. And rather than me typing it, because we've already kind of typed this, we have our marker state. If we're in the first state, which is 0, then we'll update our state to 1, just so our application is aware of that. And then we're going to go ahead and add our marker in back at this different coordinate. And then same thing, if we're at this alternate coordinate in Boise, then we will go ahead and set the state back to 0, and we will add the marker back in Madison. So we'll come back over here. We will grab our button, and let's say this is our move marker. This can be our tertiary color. This will be move marker. Okay. Things are coming together really well here. So we will let this build. So once this finishes building, we will have gone over how to create a map. We will have talked about how to move the map, how to get it to work in your application with scrolling, how to add a marker, how to programmatically move the map, programmatically remove markers, programmatically add new markers at different coordinates. Okay, let's go ahead and build up here. And then we'll have one more element that we'll cover to wrap up the demonstration here. Okay, get that building, installing, and now running. Awesome. Okay, so here is our map. We can add our first marker. We can move the map focus over to Boise. And if we hit move marker, you can see the marker will jump over here as well with us. And we can kind of hit that move marker to toggle it, and that's just moving it back and forth between those locations. We're going to move our map back to Madison. We can add that marker back to Madison. So that's showing us all of the different powers that we can do with that. The last thing that we'll talk about here for the demo is just to give a better example of scrolling and how that works. So I've pre-generated a handful of lorem ipsum content here. We'll go ahead and drop that in. So just a handful of content. This is going to give us the ability to scroll our page a little bit better. And then we are going to also add a new button down here below all of this content. Okay, so this is our Ion button. We're going to make this a nice red color. And we're calling this Create Map 2. Again, you could probably do this more elegantly if you really, in an actual application. For the purposes of our demo, we want to create a second map on our page. Historically, this has been another limitation of Google Maps in that you've only been able to create one map at a given time, right? The mapping plugin will only keep track of one reference. And so this will allow us to showcase that we can actually run multiple maps on the same page independent of each other, and that they will all behave and still function correctly. So we're going to create this map once we scroll down. Here is our web component again, right? So now we actually have 2 of these on our page. We've given this one a map ref 2. This is how you provide IDs as Angular, right? Different frameworks, React, you might just do a standard ID. So then once we have this, we'll come back over and we will talk about creating our second map. So I'm just going to grab my code here again, just so I don't mistype anything. But essentially what this is doing is we are going to copy this same functionality here, right? So this is nearly copied. The only difference is we're going to create a new map ref to keep track of the second map, and we've given a new ID to this map, right? Again, this is important because on the native side, it uses this ID to keep track of your different maps. So if you use the same ID, you'll end up messing with this map up here. They will essentially be linked together, and that's likely not what you want. So let's have our map 2 reference, put that up there, and then we should be good to go. So we'll go ahead and save that, and we will rebuild that, and we will see everything running in action. Get that built, we'll copy over the assets, and we will reload our application here. So we'll let that load up. Okay, here it goes. All right, so here's our Google map. Our first one initially loads. We can add a marker to this one. We can move it around, right? It behaves exactly as we expect. And then we can start scrolling. And we can see, again, one of the great things you see here, right, is that the map is respecting the HTML elements on your page. So it is responding to the transparency of that, of the header there, right? And that's because this is actually in line with the HTML elements. So as we scroll down, okay, and we get down here and we have our new Create Map button. So when we click on this, we've now generated another map. And this is running independently of the other one, right? So we can zoom this one super far out, you know, and we can do something like spin it around, and, you know, maybe we can just go all the way out so we can see almost the whole world there. And then if we scroll up, we can see that that hasn't affected this other map at all. So we do have 2 maps running together on the same page, and they all work together. And so that's really, really exciting to see that this works with scrolling, that it works with multiple maps, and just kind of see how it all comes together to provide a really great map experience for our applications. So we're really excited to have this out for the community and for everyone to build on and use. And again, this is totally open source, so you're welcome to look at the code. If there's features that we haven't gotten to yet, I mean, this is a version 1 release. We know that there is a lot as part of the Google Maps API that we don't have support for yet. We plan to add features over time. But again, if there's something that you're desperately needing, you know, open a PR. We're happy to look and work with the community to continue to make this plugin even better. Yeah, so let's jump back over with Thomas and Mike, and I think we can talk about questions.
You know, you'd think by now I'd realize that my mic was muted. Before we wrap up, Thomas, did you want to highlight what our npm install command is?
Yes, I can redeem myself. You can install the plugin today. Like we said, it came out a couple weeks ago. People are using it actively right now. You won't be at the cutting edge. It's stable. We're super happy about the state of the plugin. You can install it today. npm install @capacitor/Google-Maps. And with
Awesome.
that being said,
let's get some questions answered. Cool. So I've been monitoring the chat. We've had a bunch of questions pop in, and let's just get our faces in here. One of the first ones that highlighted was from Claudio. Can I use this plugin for a PWA or Ionic website? Or is this still... and in this use case, is the usage of the map subject to charges? So can we use this on the website?
Yes, so this plugin should be supported across Android and iOS and web. So you should be able to use this exact same code in all 3 of those scenarios. So it should work everywhere.
Cool. Now, what about the charges? Because that part, you know, has always been confusing to me. Will we have to pay for that?
Yeah, so I don't claim to be an expert in Google pricing. They don't make it easy. I do know that the Android and iOS versions are free. The web ones, to my knowledge, are not free. They are paid. And so that is one of the benefits of using something like this, is so that if you are deploying to Android and iOS, you are saving that money. But I do not believe that Google has a free element to that. They might have a certain number of map loads that you can get for free before you need to start paying. But that's still different than Android and iOS, where it is free regardless of how many map loads you do.
Good to know. So this one I saw it come in, and then Dallas, you just did a great job demoing it. Can you do a map rotation?
Yes, you absolutely can. So all of the gestures that you would expect to have on Google Maps will work exactly as you would expect them to.
Probably one of the coolest features, that, and the fact that as you were scrolling, you could see the translucency. I have no idea how that works or how you did it, but it's pretty flippin' awesome. Now, Dimitri has a couple questions here in the chat, but his first one is it possible to provide metadata for a marker?
Yeah, so the way you would likely do metadata for a marker is rather than supplying it directly to the marker, your application would keep track of the metadata, and you would associate that metadata to the ID of the marker that's returned, right? So we talked about how when you call that add marker function, it gives you back an ID. So you would likely say, here's all of the metadata for that marker, and let me associate that ID with it. And then that way, whenever you're responding to click events or things like that, you would say, oh, this is the ID, grab the appropriate data and display whatever I need to from there.
Cool, sounds great. Hopefully that answers your question, Dimitri. We'll pick another one from Dimitri because he's got some they have some really high quality questions. Page navigation. We didn't see it here in the demo, but I would assume that if you're navigating from A to B, the map would also transition?
Yes. Yes, so the map will transition, and there are definitely some caveats to be aware with page transitions, right? And this is more so, it's less Google Maps specific and more, this is something to be aware of when you're building with Ionic, right? When you transition pages, the pages don't get destroyed, right? They kind of hide in the background so that they're there so you can come back to them. So the maps respect that, right? Because the element is on the page, it's still there, it still is, it behaves exactly like you would expect that to. It'll stay on the page. If you transition to a different page and come back, that map will still be there in the exact same state that you would expect it to. That also means, though, that if you expect that page to go away and not ever come back, you should destroy your map. We didn't look at that in this, but there is a method for actually destroying the map. You want to make sure you're cleaning up your maps when you're all done with that page to avoid memory leaks in your application.
So Angular folks, be sure to take advantage of ng on destroyed. Yes. And React folks, your return from the use effect whenever that component gets destroyed, make sure you're destroying the map as well. Yes. Otherwise, memory leaks left and right. No one wants those. Okay, great. Cool. We have this fantastic question from Jacqueline. I apologize if I am not saying your name correctly, but markers. Can we create custom markers? I think in general, whether or not we're using Ionicons, can we have custom markers?
Yeah. It's included as a parameter in the add marker API. We have our docs available on the Capacitor doc site, so showing you all the options. Obviously, we didn't hop into it, but you can pass in an SVG that you want to render rather than the default marker. You can pass in whatever you want to it, and it will just plop in exactly like you would expect.
And for reference, folks, let's go ahead and add a quick little link to the docs. If you go to capacitorjs.com/docs/APIs/Google-Maps, you can take a look at all the available methods, all the different options that you have available, and see what you can actually do with this plugin that Dallas did not have time to cover. So, we have time for, I think, like two, three more questions. Let's pick this one. Does it support drawing polylines? I'm not familiar with this one. Thomas, Dallas?
At the moment, it does not. It's something that we want to add in the future. Like Dallas said when he was showing off the demo, this is the V1 version of the plugin. We definitely want to add more to it. Polygons and polylines are something that are currently not supported in the plugin, but it's something we definitely want to add in the future.
good to know. I think people are very excited about it. But Google Maps, I know for a fact, is a massive, massive API.
Yes.
There's a lot there's a lot in there, and there's a reason why it's a big Google product because it performs a lot of actions. So with with time, all bugs are shallow, or all bugs shall be squashed, whatever the saying is. We'll get features added. Cool. This is a really interesting one. How does map move or work with inline modals? Can we move the map when the modal is open, or can we pause the map move when the modal is open? Maybe a quick, easier way is like, how does this work with different components other than scrolling, but some of our gesture-based components like modals we can swipe to close when we're on a mobile form factor. How's the behavior working in there?
Yeah. So because this element is actually rendered into the HTML, it should just work exactly like you would expect it to. It should still support all of those exact same gestures to function and behave like you would hope.
Cool. And then I guess both. This is a question I have, and one for both of you. There's plenty of solution. There's a Cordova solution. There's the community solution. Why should we throw our hats into the ring and make a plugin? What's the big benefit of using the official core one versus, say, the community one, or building your own?
Yeah, I can take this one. The Cordova plugin doesn't play super nice with the current version of Capacitor, which makes sense. That a very complex integration like Google Maps. While we do have Cordova compatibility, it's not 100%. It's like 99%. And the Google Maps falls into that 1%. So the Cordova plugin, while you can kind of get it to work, may not work as expected if you're using the newest version of Capacitor. The community plugin, it's great. We're super happy it exists. We love providing different options. I recommend it to people on the forum and the Discord. If you don't like our API, they have a slightly wider feature set and they have a different implementation. So if you say, I hate web components or I like their API better, it's a totally viable solution. But the reason you should use the Ionic plugin, it's a core capacitor plugin. It's always going to work day one with the newest versions of Capacitor. When Capacitor 4 comes out, it will work along with all of the other capacitor core plugins that we have. If you work at a larger company, maybe it's a little harder to get buy-in for a community plugin. Like as an individual dev, it's great. But if you work at a company with tens of thousands of employees, like it's a lot harder to have that. And having the backing of a company like Ionic with the guarantee, like, yes, this is going to work day one. Like, even if it's free, like we're going to guarantee that it works is a huge buy-in, knowing that it's supported by us, the creators of Ionic Capacitor and Stencils. Like just knowing that can be a huge weight off of a company's shoulders. So community solution, it's great. The Ionic solution, also great. It's its pros and cons. Obviously, we like our solution the best. We think it's the easiest to use. But yeah, definitely check out the community plugin if you want. But check ours out too.
So definitely safe to say different options for needs, environment, corporate structure. When in doubt, when should you use one? Well, it depends on your needs.
Exactly. They serve a lot of the same things. They're both Google Maps plugins. They'll do Google Maps-y things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It looks like we are at our time. Thank you, everyone who came and hang out today. Really appreciate it. I do want to do a quick little plug. In a couple of weeks, we have IonicConf coming up. If you are not registered for it, please go to ionic.io/IonicConf, and let's put that link in the chat as well. Thank you so much, Thomas and Dallas. Really appreciate you both coming on and talking all Google Maps. Thank you, everyone in the chat. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.